There's not any new business that I know of. Go to approval of minutes, payroll warrants, and treasury warrants.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor by roll call, Melissa Murphy,
Aye.
Christy Parentella,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Jason Bridges, aye. That passes 4-0. Pending contracts. Any questions or any feedback, Libby?
Unless there's questions.
Okay.
Move approval.
I'll second.
All those in favor by roll call, Melissa Murphy,
Aye.
Christy Parentella,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Jason Bridges, aye. That passes 4-0. On to reports. Nantucket Historical Commission update. We have Hillary Rayport here with us today. Hillary? Do you need to share the screen?
Yes. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Hi, everyone. It's very nice to be here with you. Thanks for inviting me to update the community and the board about the Historical Commission. I'm also very pleased to see Holly Backus here, our town preservation planner. Hello, Holly. I'm going to go ahead and share a presentation. Just need to present this. Okay, can you all see the presentation? Great. Okay, so let me just move, I just need to move this so it's not in my way. There we go. Great. So this is the first update that the Historical Commission has been able to make to the Select Board. We were reconstituted in our current iteration in July of 2019. So we've been working for about 2.5 years. So I thought I would update the board and the community just with a little information about historical commissions in context. Our recent achievements, our future goals, or at least what we're thinking, how we're thinking of our future goals, and then leave lots of time if there are questions. So given that Nantucket has had a historic district commission since 1955 and has only had a historical commission since 2005, and only much more recently has it been quite active, I thought it would be helpful just to take a minute to explain that we're a 7-person independent government commission responsible for preservation planning on Nantucket. So we serve the public by protecting the National Historic Landmark of Nantucket. We advise the Select Board and the community on matters of preservation, and we work with the preservation planner, who's Holly Backus, the planning director, Andrew Vorse, and other municipal agencies. And we create plans and guidelines for preservation, direct surveys of buildings and lands of archaeological and historic significance, and we advocate for historic preservation. As a municipal commission, we are the counterparty within the town for nonprofit societies such as the Nantucket Preservation Trust and other groups interested in preservation and history on Nantucket. I just wanted to put the local historical commission in context by explaining that locally we are part of a system of preservation that connects to how the United States of America preserves its significant places. So we are connected to the U.S. Park Service, which maintains the National Register of Historic Places. So I just mentioned that because we hear about historic districts, we hear about the Nantucket National Historic Landmark, but from a government perspective, the way preservation is encouraged is through the National Register, which is really just a signification. It doesn't have any standard protections, but once a building, or in the case of Nantucket, a whole island is placed on the National Register, it confers certain benefits and for tax credits, for funding, for the development of technical guidance for its preservation. And that's all pushed down from the federal level to the state level and to the local level. So what this means for Nantucket locally and why it's important to maintain a historical commission locally is that in addition to doing local preservation planning and advocacy locally, we can also liaise with the Massachusetts Historical Commission in terms of their review and compliance when there are federal actions that might affect our island. An example of that would be the mitigation fund that was established in response to the wind farm. We can also support tax credits when a property owner wants to have a rebate for a historic rehabilitation of a property that's being used as, a hotel or a rental. That's something that we support locally. But we're very different from the Historic District Commission. The Historic District Commission maintains design guidelines and does architectural review. They issue demolition permits, and they permit the building inspector to issue a demolition permit, and they also administer the minimum maintenance bylaw. The Historical Commission locally, really the most important thing that we do is surveying and documenting buildings of historic interest on Nantucket. So the first year, the Historical Commission really was active with our own organization. I'm not going to dwell on this because organization is not as exciting as some of the other things that we've been doing recently, but we are fully appointed. We do meet at least monthly. Shortly after our formation in 2019, the town created a position for a preservation planner, which was quickly filled by Holly Backus, who serves as our staff liaison. We are part of a certified local government designation, which really just gives us access to grants and some additional access to technical training with Park Service. That was a significant organizational achievement of our first year. Importantly, we did complete training. So we had a 2-day training program with the National Association of Preservation Commissioners, which Holly set up for us, and the HDC was also invited to join. So those are some of our organizational achievements. We've also been quite active with preservation achievements. The thing that is most significant, and I would say of which we are most proud of achieving a start to, is that we kicked off what will be the first island-wide survey of historic resources in over 30 years on Nantucket. And we did this with the assistance of the Massachusetts Historical Commission, who is funding 50% of the cost of the project through a grant. It is about a $52,000 project in total, which will survey a pilot portion of the island in the fish lots, but also make a plan. So at the end of this 1-year period, we will have a plan of all of the different neighborhoods, how we're going to step through surveying all of the structures in the neighborhoods for the entire island, taking into account all the resources. And this is going to be incredibly important for preservation on Nantucket, because when an applicant is interested in going to the HDC to look for approval for some kind of change or action or even demolition, the HDC needs to know the significance of the structure. They need to know what the distinctive elements are of the structure. And if this hasn't been recorded, it can't be preserved. So this survey is all about providing information on our National Historic Landmark, which can then be used by other people who are doing research, who want to know more about their the architectural history of their homes, or by the HDC. So it's very important, and it's a fundamental activity of Historical Commission. We've also supported town agencies that are undergoing Section 106 reviews by liaisoning with the Massachusetts Historical Commission to identify historic resources in the area of work so that they can be protected. As most of you know, historic pavement was something we identified as an underappreciated and not very well understood and highly threatened resource on Nantucket. These are 200-year-old stones in our streets that have been carved by steam tools in many cases, or split by hand. They've been there for a long time. And we developed and delivered final recommendations and guidelines to the DPW. We received research from preservation engineering that led to the updating of the specification for laying cobblestone in a permeable bedding instead of stone dust. And that's now part of the official specification for cobblestone repair on Nantucket. And we also did some work on planning and zoning, reviewing and compiling past plans for Wilkes Square, Harbor Place, and advising other town boards on preservation planning strategies for this area. We published reports, including some reports I haven't even talked about here on the one end. You can see we published a report on roundabouts with Nantucket in mind, looking at how roundabouts could perhaps more effectively fit into some of the smaller areas of Nantucket. And all of these reports are available on our website, and there are other reports as well. We've also had education and advocacy initiatives. One of the things that we identified as a goal was to reach out to different communities on Nantucket to advocate for preservation and to really help them with what they might be interested in that might intersect with preservation. So one of the areas that we identified was the Nantucket Association of Real Estate Brokers. And we were very interested in educating the brokers more about how their buyers might be able to take advantage of tax credits. If the home or the building is on the National Register, and if it's a contributing structure to Nantucket, it can be eligible for rebates for qualified rehabilitation. It can be up to 40% of the qualified rehabilitation costs. So it's pretty significant. So we thought, how can we get brokers to know about these and get people to consider them when they have a historic building? And by the way, the definition of historic on Nantucket goes all the way up to buildings built in 1975, not all buildings, obviously, but buildings that contribute to the period of significance, which extends to 1975 on Nantucket, could be eligible for tax credits for the rehabilitation. So we're going to be offering an accredited course for continuing education credit. That's because of COVID been moved to spring of 2022. But we're excited about that and grateful to NAREB for inviting us to offer this course with their trainer. We've also supported a WPI project with an interest in salvaging historic interiors. We prefer that they remain, but certainly the historic material we do not want to see leave the island. So is there a way that we can keep that here? We have been promoting awareness of Nantucket's historic free Black community. We created a monument to resident Arthur Cooper, self-emancipated man who lived near Angola Street. This was in partnership with the Land Bank and the Museum of African American History. So you can all go and see the monument. I know many of you were there. But just as important as the monument, we really created a wonderful program. We were grateful to our town manager for speaking, and we had other folks participating. It was a great day. It also raised awareness for the buildings about the buildings that are no longer here and why they might be no longer here. Arthur Cooper's building is no longer standing. In fact, all of the homes on Angola Street were demolished. There's no trace of the free Black community that lived there. And lastly, we are participating in a collaboration to create an exhibit on the history of preservation on Nantucket. This is a flyer that we created for NAREB called How to Get the Government to Pay Your Client Not to Cut Her House. And we were happy that Dylan Fernandez tweeted about our dedication of the Arthur Cooper Monument. We did have some goals that we didn't achieve. It's important for us to coordinate and meet with the HDC. Ideally, we'd like to meet 1 to 2 times a year. But we are planning to meet November 12th. So we will be able to have a meeting in the current fiscal year. We also have a long-term goal of helping the town with a restoration and rehabilitation of the historic sidewalks on Main Street that are extremely dilapidated to the point where it might actually be hard to repair them. It is already hard. They might end up not getting repaired. And we felt that a study would help the town plan for actual construction. So we partnered with the Commission on Disability We applied for a grant that would fund a rehabilitation plan. This is not just a restoration. It's actually about making the sidewalk accessible, but also keeping the historic material there. We wanted to think about treatments to manage around the tree roots, treatments for ramps. Unfortunately, the CPC denied the application. So we'd love to have more conversation with our colleagues in the town about how to get this important work done. And just before I wrap up and go to Q&A, some next goals. So we certainly want to continue to execute the island-wide survey of historic resources. We expect to do a little bit every year for many years. We do want to seek funding for the historic Main Street sidewalk restoration and rehabilitation to assist the town with going beyond just accessibility, but actually keeping it historic and accessible. And we want to continue to support and collaborate with the HDC. We have some ideas of new projects, and I want to stress that we haven't started working on any of these yet. So if you think, well, I didn't know anything about this, I'm announcing it here tonight. This is just a sketch of our work plan for the next year or longer. We think that it would be very helpful to have a preservation plan for town-owned historic resources. So this would be looking just at the resources that the town owns, documenting them, thinking about treatments over time and needs of these resources, and that this type of plan will come in handy when there's an opportunity. It's work that you really want to do ahead of time. We'd like to initiate some discussions with the local tribes and the state archaeologists. We'd like to assess archival needs with respect to historic records. And what I mean by this are records from the very old town meetings and the historic Board of Selectmen notes, and find out if there's some preservation that we could do of these archives so that they persist in perpetuity. We also have an idea of investigating a small loan fund based on a model in Arlington, Massachusetts, which would make low-cost loans to individual owners of residential properties or commercial properties, but loans that can be used to help you maintain your home. It's very expensive. And the idea in Arlington anyway, it's been self-funding for 30 years. It's a public-private partnership. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm going to stop. Let's see, I'm going to stop sharing my screen somehow. Here we go. And yeah, I hope you can pepper me with questions about preservation, about our work. I would especially like to hear your thoughts on our future work, what is important to you, what you think the challenges are, any advice for us.
Go ahead, Matt.
Yes, Matt.
Yeah, first thing I'll say that's thank you. It's an amazing presentation. You guys have done a lot in a short period of time. The study on historic pavement was great. I read it and I know more about pavement than I ever thought I'd need to know. And it's, I'm glad that you guys did it. Tax credits are a great tool that we use. I didn't know about them till I was mostly done with 79 Orange Street and applied retroactively and received some. And it is a huge help in rehabilitating buildings, and they pay for a lot of the buildings as qualified expenses. You know, all the new systems, you know, all the work you have to do, you know, it's pretty impressive, and it really is an incentive for people to do the right thing. And then my question was, what was the rationale for the CPC to deny the funds for that rehabilitation? Because I think $80,000, seems short money to me, but what's the rationale?
So I'm still awaiting the letter, but I was able to talk with the chair of the CPC, and it was explained to me that there were two reasons. One was we hadn't actually asked the town to pay for it. I mean, we did ask the town because the CPC asked us to after our presentation. So I think they'd like to see us make a formal request of the town, explain the study, see if there's other funding besides Community Preservation Act funding. But the second reason was that they felt it wasn't a priority. And I'm not sure if that means they think the town thinks it's not a priority, or if they just think that rehabilitating a sidewalk, a historic sidewalk like Main Street, isn't a priority. So that was a bit of a puzzler to me.
Matt?
Well, I hope we follow up and see what that is, because anyone who's driven up Main Street recently can tell you that it's needed. And if we're able to do it in a way that meets ADA requirements and still retains a historic material and character, I think it would be amazing. And it would be an example we could use around the rest of the island. So, good luck, keeping that, I'm in support. Good luck, keeping that on the front burner.
Thank you. That's good to hear, Matt. I appreciate the comment.
Any other comments? Questions? Well, I can say I was at the Arthur Cooper event, and it was well organized. It was powerful. You left something there, in perpetuity. Like, it checked all the boxes I didn't even know were there. And I got to learn about him. So that was really well done, Hillary. So you and everybody who were involved, that was really great. So I really appreciate the work that you and Historical Commission, everybody else did.
Thank you. That was really a special day. I'm really glad you and others could be there. And it was a team effort. And that monument was given by, it was a gift to the land bank of a woman who lives on Angola Street. And I'm grateful to her and everybody who could make that happen.
One of the things you said coming down the road is, or maybe you're doing this now, surveying town-owned historic properties or anything historic. Is that started, or is that a future initiative?
Yeah, so the preservation plan for town-owned resources is, we want it to be a future initiative. There certainly there's a list of town-owned historic resources. It was maintained at the DPW, but we'd like to develop that, and we'd like to keep in touch with the board, because certainly there's some intersection with the facilities work that you're doing. Just to comment way ahead of time, so there are no surprises of the historic perspective on some of these facilities. Nantucket's so unusual. We have like this old building we've always had, and this person has always been in it, and bingo, you find out there's this incredible story and incredible construction history. So those are the sorts of things we want to look at and understand and share with the community.
Matt?
Yeah, one that I would like to see us dig into is what federal or state money is available when we make a plan for the jetties. That building needs some upgrading and needs some work. And I think that, using the state and federal resources that are available to bring that back to its former glory and also bring it up to code and makes it very functional for tenants, I think that would be, a great project, a great thing for you guys to dig into.
Yeah, there actually are grants from the Massachusetts Historical Commission for the study or work on particular buildings. So if it's a municipally owned building, you can apply for a grant to either do like a plan, or it can actually pay for work. The grants aren't very big, but if you really just want to do a study, they can cover that. So we can definitely keep you posted on that. We did raise it last year, but it was just too short notice. So now with a little more lead time, we might be able to get that off the ground. And I know Holly, our preservation planner, keeps a close eye on those things as well.
Can we go to the public? We have a hand up.
Thank you. This is Bruce Mandel speaking. I like that presentation very much. It was very informative. Thank you. My question is, are there any resources available to a community such as Nantucket in the West End that would tell us what structures or private homes and things like that in our community might be considered qualifying for historic status or designation that might be helpful in the community preserving and enhancing these structures.
The answer is yes. And Holly, can I call on you to answer that?
Absolutely. Yes, Bruce, we have, first of all, there are surveys that were done back in the 1980s of parts of Nantucket, especially out in Nantucket. So there's cultural resource surveys available here at the town, as well as some of them are available on the state's website, Macris GIS. And actually, I could email you all that information, as well as the update to the NHL, the National Historic Landmark District, that was done in 2012 from actually CPC funds that NPT acquired to update the NHL and actually include our period of significance up to 1975. And that has a list of about 300 pages worth of Nantucket properties, whether they're vacant or not vacant, whether they're contributing, not contributing. And ones, I will tell you this, there is a caveat on it. You can take a look at it on the town's website, on the Historical Commission's page. It's listed, and it's all in chronological order, alphabetical order. And so you can look up that particular property. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Thanks.
Yeah,
Thank you,
so
Holly.
we meet, thank you, Holly. Yeah, we meet the third Friday of the month at 10 a.m. We've been meeting by Zoom, and you know, Holly is available to answer questions about particular structures, and we're also available if you want to join us. You're all welcome.
Thank you, Hillary. Any last comments from the board? Okay. Thank you, Hillary. Thank you, Holly.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay, town managers report.
Thank you. So we have one item under the town manager's report, and in consultation with the chair and the vice chair, and this has happened a couple of times now, I think. Sometimes there are board member questions during the annual tax rate hearing, which is currently scheduled for November 17th. And it was discussed and suggested that an advanced discussion could be helpful, so that if the board is thinking of any substantive tax rate shift changes, there are time to make those and prepare those before the hearing. There does get to be a timing issue between setting the tax rate, getting Department of Revenue approval, and printing and mailing the tax bills. And if there's a lot of work to do to restructure the tax rate shift calculations and formulas, that all gets very difficult. So I think the assessor and the finance director have a presentation to give, and hopefully this will be informative. And if the board does want to make changes, they can be made well ahead of time.
Thank you, Libby. My name's Rob Raney. I'm the tax assessor for the town of Nantucket, as you all know. I prepared a little bit of a refresher course, as we only do this once a year, on the purpose of the tax rate hearing, how it works, what the residential exemption is, how that works, and the shift itself, and how that works. We do not have final values for FY22 yet. We're still working on those. It's a long, challenging process. So I've used, in this presentation, I've used numbers from fiscal 21 because we know what those were. So if we could go to the next slide, please. This basically shows that the tax levy, which last year was about 88 million, just under 89 million, is distributed between the residential class, the open space class, commercial and industrial classes, as well as personal property. On the right-hand side of the screen are the percentages that those work out to for the total value of the island. Next slide, please. So every year, municipalities decide within limits established by statute and the Department of Revenue the percentage of the tax levy that will be paid by each class of real property owners and personal property owners. The decision, as you know, will be made at a public hearing, and that's not tonight. That'll be hopefully closer to the end of November. Next slide, please. So traditionally, this sort of looks back over the last 10 years. It shows that the residential class, which is the blue line at the top, pays predominantly most of the tax levy. As you towards the bottom, there's a commercial component, which is above the industrial and open space and personal property, which are kind of squeezed in at the bottom because there's this percentage that they pay of the tax levy is so small. Next slide, please. So moving on to the residential exemption. The residential exemption was enacted by the Commonwealth in 1979 and adopted pretty quickly after that locally on Nantucket in 1981. The residential exemption is an option under property tax classification, Mass General Law, Chapter 59, Section 5C, that shifts the tax burden within the residential class from owners of moderately, or as we would say, year-round property owners to seasonal ones. Because one of the requirements of the residential exemption is you have to not only own the property, but you have to live in it as your primary residence. So you're basically shifting the burden within the residential class from the year-round owners to those that own their property only seasonally and occupy it seasonally. The amount of the tax levy paid by the residential class remains the same, but it's the way it's divided up is a little bit different because the exempted residential valuation of the levy is distributed over less assessed value. Because the year-round people or the primary owners are paying less of it, and it's shifted to the others. This creates a shift, as I've just mentioned, within the residential class that reduces the taxes paid by homeowners of moderately valued properties, with the difference being made up by the non-owner occupied residential properties. So you're getting a benefit to some, but then you're shifting it to others. Next slide, please. Just sort of some bullet points here. Mass General Law, Chapter 59, Section 5C allows a community to provide an exemption to taxpayers who own and occupy their dwelling as their primary residence. This exemption may not exceed 35% of the average value within the residential property class. In fiscal 21, the average residential value on Nantucket was just under $2.1 million. And you all selected a 25% exemption, which reduced each qualifying parcel by $522,914. Next slide, please. The loss in value attributed to the exemption is made up by the entire residential class. So yes, you're getting a benefit, but there's no free lunch. So somebody else has to make up the difference. For the fiscal year 2021, this number is a little deceiving. There were 2,251 what we call whole exemptions. And really there were 2,298 qualifying exemptions. But what happens is if you have a property that the exemption amount exceeds the value of your property or is close to it, we cannot reduce the value of your property to below 10%. So there are a number of partial exemptions where the value of the property is low enough that you don't get the full benefit of the exemption. Only the residential class is affected by changes to the residential exemption. And Nantucket is one of approximately only 20 communities in the state, including Boston, however, which has the residential exemption. So it's not, we get a lot of questions from the public, assuming that it's a Nantucket specific exemption. It's not. It's a state exemption that Nantucket has had the benefit of for many, many years. Next slide, please. So when we talk about a shift, what we're doing is we're shifting the percentage of the levy that is raised by each class of property, and it's shifted from the residential class to the commercial class. So in fiscal 2021, The shift that we had was 1.7. So as you can see, and down in the commercial, industrial, and personal properties classes, what it would be on the left, the commercial there says 5.67%. That's before the shift. With the 1.7 shift, they're now paying 9.64% of the levy. And as you can see above, the residential portion is reduced because you're shifting it from the residential to the commercial. Next slide, please. This is sort of an illustration of what that looks like. So the pie is the tax levy. So the amount that has to be raised by taxes doesn't change. It's just how it's distributed among the different classes changes. So this is what it looks like with the 1.7 shift. Next slide, please. This is what it would have looked like if we did a 1.65 shift. It's not much of a difference, but it is something. Next slide. And this is a 1.6 shift. So between those three slides, you can see the residential portion is increasing and the commercial and industrial personal property portions are decreasing because the shift it's a sliding scale. So again, you have one whole pie and you're just how you're splitting it up is what we're talking about. Next slide, please. These are some of the options that we presented last year or that were possible. So this is what it looks like with a 20% residential exemption, a 25% residential exemption, a 30%, and a 35%. Those are on the left. And then the shift numbers, what they would have looked like. We had a 25% exemption, which with a 1.7 shift, and that's sort of in the middle of the screen. And then on the far right, you can see that as you graduate up to each shift in each class, the numbers on the right show the changes for the average. Those are for the average tax bills. Obviously, individuals are a little bit different. So you can see, so if you're going from a 1.7 down to a 1.65, the commercial change was about a $400 change. And the residential change was about, if you did not have the exemption, it was about a $32 change. If you did have the exemption, it was about a $25 change. Next slide, please. And that's about it. I didn't want to take up too much time because we're going to have a real one in a couple of weeks, but this is sort of a refresher.
Thank you, Rob. Any thoughts from anyone? Matt?
We went down a little bit on the commercial. I'm sort of thinking we go to 1.6 this year and keep 25% residential. The reason when we get there, we'll talk about it, but to be thinking about it, we've got a lot of big expenses with coastal resiliency, other things. It would be nice to have the ability in the future to do that. I also think that there's a lot of those quote unquote residential properties are being used commercially. And so, I think the commercial are paying a different amount. So I think in a fairness issue, I would like to, over the next few years, give the commercial properties that are commercial a bit of a break and try to level the playing field.
Thank you, Matt. Does anybody remember when we went from 20 to 25% for the residential exemption? Was that 2017? Was it?
Yes. Yeah. More. Yeah. I think it was fiscal 17, because it was at that time the Municipal Modernization Act came out and they allowed the exemption to go up to 35%. And we had been at 20 and we went to 25.
Matt?
Yeah, and there were board members at the time that wanted to go to the full 35, which I advocated against because I at this point, the year-round people with an exemption have a really pretty good deal still. And you have to keep that in mind and sort of keep some of your ammunition dry. That 35% we might need, we might need to be able to use that in the future. But as soon as if you give something like that, it's hard to take it back. It's easier to let out the reins than it is to pull them back in. So I would caution us about doing that. We're talking $24 and, so anyway.
Any other thoughts, questions? You thought this would be, go ahead, Christy.
Just more of a comment that I think it was really helpful to see this before we have the public hearing later next month. I feel like sometimes we get a lot of questions and it's a little bit too late. So it was good to have time to process this. So thank you, Rob.
Yeah, Matt?
And one other thing I look at, and I sent Rob an email this afternoon, so I didn't have to do the math myself. The average with real residential exemption is valued at $1.3 million, and so as $1.3 million. The average without it is valued at $2 million, $2.1 million. And so you take that, that alone puts a difference between the two of about 35%. And then you take $500,000, which is another 25% on the, on the value. And there's a, sort of the average with an exemption is saving about 60% over the other. So we're getting, we are getting a great benefit as an exemption right now. So.
Rob?
And I would just say that these are 2021 numbers. The 2022 numbers are probably going to be higher because they're based on sales that took place in 2020. And as we all know, the real estate market was pretty crazy. And when the market is crazy and things are going up, everybody tends to sort of go up as well. So this is just kind of food for thought at this point. But yeah, no, I would agree with Matt. I'm not supposed to make a recommendation, but I would say you want to hold something in reserve. You don't want to max things out.
Matt?
And the other point I have to make is the rate is a math equation. Everyone says, "Oh, you're so lucky. Your rate is low." Well, our rate is low, but our values are high. And so our average without the exemption would be paying, a fair amount of money. And the people that don't have it, especially the commercial that are paying a bit more, are paying a fair amount of money. And to afford to live here, a lot of people, have employee housing that doesn't get exempted. They have their businesses, which are, could be highly valued. And, you start adding it up, and to be able to live here and, remain here is a fairly expensive undertaking. And so anything we can do to, sort of, to tip the scales a little bit and keep some ammunition for later, I think is important.
Thank you, Matt. Any other thoughts or questions from the board? Welcome, Don. Okay, thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Anything else, Libby, on that for town manager's report? You good?
That was it.
Okay.
Okay.
Moving on to the select board reports and comments. We're going to review, discuss / adopt a select board position statement regarding the Sconset Bluff erosion control project. Libby's going to kind of walk us through some of how we got to this today. I wanted to say, Christy and I chose and talked about what words to put on here, and we chose review, discussion, adoption to give us room to do all of those. It doesn't mean we have to adopt anything tonight, but I do hope we review and discuss tonight. Libby?
Sorry. So pursuant to recent executive sessions that the board has held involving litigation between the town and the Sconset Beach Preservation Fund, SBPF, the board had some discussion about compiling a list of talking points regarding various issues of the project. And the discussion was, surrounded the litigation, obviously, and it was pointed out a few times that the select board has a much wider perspective of the issues around the project than the Conservation Commission does, as they have very much of a regulatory focus. Obviously, that's their role. And the board has a lot of other considerations. So the idea was to put this sort of talking point list together. And that occurred between Ken Bogrand, myself, and Mr. Fee. We really mostly Ken and Matt did this. And then we kind of cleaned it up a bit and then had some staff discussion in which we were proposing that the board consider putting out a statement, a position statement about the project, which the board members could use to discuss the project when asked, and really put it online so that people can be referred to it so that there's a consistent message coming from the town. And so that statement was developed through town administration with some input from individual board members, no group emails or anything like that. And the idea was to bring this to a board meeting for review and discussion and to obtain any public input. So that's how it came about.
Thank you, Libby, for that background. Melissa?
Thanks, Jason. And Libby, if I might just add, I feel like one of the most important things about this from my perspective is that we hear a lot of feedback from proponents and opponents of the Sconset Beach geotube project, but clearly we're representatives of the greater community. And I think in light of the fact that we're facing $500 million in capital investments over the next 5 to 10 years, it felt really important to give the community some context of how we're approaching this project and where our focus is, which there hasn't been a lot of opportunity to discuss that on my short time on the board, mostly because we are and have been in litigation. So I just wanted to put that context out there that for me, it feels very important to hear from the Nantucket community, the wider Nantucket community, about how they would like us to approach this project and sort of turn the mic down a little bit on the people who are opposed or in favor of the geotubes. And, you know, I want to hear from the average Nantucket community citizen about what their thoughts are and how they would like to see this board approach policy concerning not just this project, but also coastal erosion. So the hope from my perspective was to get some conversation and some input started to help us and also contextualize our concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. I also was wanted us to put something out like this statement, because as the elected policymakers, the community, our constituents need to know what is our vision, what do we stand for, what do we want? I mean, Matt, you asked that one day, what do we want? I mean, nobody really knows what we want. Do we even know what we want? And so this pushed, what are our concerns? What are the town, just overall bigger picture concerns? In really what is the lens that we're looking through? So we're not trying to just explain to everybody like, oh no, you need to understand everything we're going through. Like it's not one of those. It's what are everything that we have to consider in this project. And those quotes, I've said those quotes to many outlets, and the paper hasn't got in there, but I don't feel like we're at odds with anyone. We're really trying to figure this out with a very, very large lens. And I think, Melissa, you said it, whether it's, 100 million, a billion, there's some significant cost that's going to affect everyone and every taxpayer. So if you're not on the east side of the island, this is going to affect you and coastal resiliency in general. So those are my opening thoughts. Anything? I want the board to talk a little bit before we go to the public. Matt?
Yeah, if you look at just it was for the public, in case any people haven't looked at it, the goal that we've written is to preserve the homes and access to Baxter Road as long as it's not harming others, placing the majority of the costs on those that benefit, while working cooperatively to mitigate the town's exposure and provide an equitable framework for other areas of the island. That's our big goal. And so we've listed the concerns, and if we want, if we want to go through those or talk about those, we can. But I think the reality is we're in a set position right now with, certain constraints and certain, certain aspects that we're going to have to deal with, whether we want to deal with them or not. And I would hope that this is a way, I think we've made a big move. I think SBPF admitting that they are going to have to move at some point, accepting that's way different than it was a while ago. Some of the work group issues that we identified last year were, some or all of them are included in this. And there's still a lot of detail, a lot of meat on the bone that would have to happen if this is what we're going to do. There's agreement, there would have to be agreements to be, understood and struck, and, I look at this as a opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to tighten up some of the things that have been an issue. It's an opportunity, if we're forming a partnership, well, then we need to be partners. And that means that we can't be in a situation, sort of hold harmless is a big part of this, not having threats, but having a partnership and the threat. So I think that's what is in, that's the spirit of what's here. And I do think it can be, if we do this correctly, it can provide a model for how do you pay for it? How do you pay for it fairly? How do how do we find sand? And, I think we can use the existing situation to the town's advantage. And, and to the homeowners in the towns, and to, and clarify how we're going to do this going forward in certain areas. I think this is, I know some people are saying that we are, we're moving too fast and this is sort of out of sequence, or, there'll be a lot of probably things we're going to hear. I wish we had the ability, to take 4 more months, 6 more months, another year. We don't, we need to get sand on that thing this winter to make sure that it is not impacting, downdrift beaches. We need to get that done this winter, and we need to move forward in some manner. So, and so that's sort of my hope, is that we can do that.
Thank you, Matt. Dawn and Christy.
I think that it was really important to put all of these concerns down on paper that we've been talking about for so many years now, and really highlight it to the community in such a concise list where it's very easy to understand and it hits all of the big picture concerns. Everything still exists that did exist when this started and was voted to be started as an emergency. And it's even further highlighted now with what we know, with more knowledge of what we're facing in terms of sea level rise and coastal erosion going forward, where this can help set a stage on how to do some things correctly. However, this project has become so muddied with very strong feelings on either end, and other things playing into it with personalities and so forth that have just butted heads for so many years. And I feel like for a while, the select board just has completely not known what to do. Here's things from both sides that are so strong. I love what Melissa said about wanting to hear sort of from more of the average person that doesn't have such a stake in this, but is a taxpayer, goes to Sankaty Lighthouse on occasion or walks the bluff once in a while. So I'm hoping that we can somehow bring this back to a bit of a restart, sort of and do things more correctly this time. Really take all of the knowledge that we've amassed and just make sure all of the correct pieces are in place, because hindsight is 2020, and maybe we can figure out a way to get everyone comfortable with taking this kind of back to the beginning in a way, and moving it forward with more recognition about where we're heading. About the fact that we definitely have to build a replacement road, and that eventually we will have to face the meeting of some kind of failure criteria that will necessitate more further infrastructure and house moves that are existing. So I guess I will end with that. I think that the picture becomes clearer. Hopefully we can work towards something that everybody can live with.
Thank you, Don. Christy?
Thank you. I think everything that I was going to say previously has been mentioned, and I agree with the rest of the board members. I think something that I've viewed this document, this statement as, is similar to our strategic plan. It kind of has this broad goal. It's our vision for the future. That's how we start each of our strategic plan goals. And then it kind of outlines some of the more immediate goals and things that we want to see get done, like Matt mentioned, having sand this winter. So it's kind of laying that groundwork, but it's not the be all end all. So every year we're looking at that strategic plan and we're making tweaks and we're adding new goals. And I see this being a similar thing where we can adjust things as we're moving forward and getting more information or learning new things. But at least gives us that framework, so that kind of what everyone's been saying is, what is our goal? What is our vision? This is it. And this gives us that starting point. And then we get to move on from there.
Thank you, Christy. Matt?
And just a reminder, this is a draft. If Ken or Libby or I missed anything, this is your chance to, for you guys to put it in, or for the public to put it in. And it would be great to have, instead of having the public tell us, how dumb we are and how we're doing the dumbest thing ever, it would be great if the public could tell us, how we could improve this. And so, I think, that would be, that's my hope, is that this could be, let's get some positive, as much as possible, get some positive feedback. And so.
Yeah, constructive feedback. Might not be positive tonight.
There you go. Thank you. That's the word. That's a better word.
Yeah. Melissa?
Thank you. And thanks for mentioning that, Matt. I think one concern I just wanted to raise with the board is on the strategy moving forward, issue number 1. My sense is, sort of going back to the Arcadis report, retain the existing tow protection for a period of time. And I think we have to get clear on what that period of time is. It's not forever. But I think there has to be some agreement about at what point we are willing to say the tow protection is no longer viable or no longer needed. And I think concurrent to that, important to highlight that our commitment to start the planning of the relocation of Baxter Road and allocating resources to get that process underway, because that was a really clear takeaway from the Arcadis report. So I'm just not, I'm happy. I'd love to hear from other board members about the period of time in which we're talking about retention of the existing tow protection.
Thank you, Melissa. Any response to that, Matt?
I'll wade in. I think, Melissa, you make a really good point that, we need to get started and on some of the big picture items, the planning, et cetera. That stuff that is not going to be easy for us. If we were just doing straight out takings, it won't be easy for SBPF if they're going to be trying to willingly get neighbors to do the road. Part of the goal here is to get a hold harmless for the town, get the people who are going to be benefiting from that road to be willingly giving it, and not forcing us to go lot by lot and do takings. And we've received in the mail, in our emails, we received 1 or 2 neighbors already saying, well, if you guys don't do this, we're gonna fight you tooth and nail, and you're gonna have to take my whole property. So we want to avoid that type of situation. I'm hoping that that we can find a way to avoid that type of sort of antagonism. My thought is, when does the toe protection go away? My thought is we should be getting clear criteria together. I think last time we attempted to do it through a walkable beach, which I believe the beach is still walkable. I believe it has thinned somewhat, not as much as as some people believe, and it hasn't stayed exactly the same. So I think the walkable beach idea was on the right path, but needs some refinement. That would be something that have to be done. What I've been telling people, this could last 3 years, or it could last 30 years. If there's enough sand on it, and it's not undermined, and it's not impacting downdrift beaches, it may not have to come out tomorrow. So I think that's it would be great. People, there's some people are going to say, we want to know, how many years, how exact, when it's going to happen. I think that's partly unknowable, but I think if we have the triggers, if we get, Arcadis or others to help do some of those details on sand and on triggers and other things, and get the input from the Concom, we should be able to make that better. We should be able to make that clearer for all of us. It's very clear when we have to move the road. When that stake was within 25 feet of the road, we have to start moving that road. That's sort of about the only thing. When I look at this, that's about the only thing that's clear out there right now. So,
Melissa?
Thanks, Jason. I guess just as a follow-up, and thank you, Matt. I think we should consider adding some kind of caveat language to that number 1. And I'm not quite sure how to word it. Until criteria to be developed are met, something that indicates that we're not talking about keeping the toe protection there forever. So I don't know how to paraphrase what Matt just said, but I don't know what you think about something like that.
Don or Christy or Matt? Any thoughts? Matt, just thumbs up.
yeah, I think there could be some. Yeah, I think we could put some wording in for based on criteria, and we still have to work on the criteria. And Ken maybe can make it sound intelligent.
Don?
Maybe something like recognizing that the toe protection is not sustainably permanent structure, and over time there will be the need to reevaluate. Something like that.
Yep. Any other areas we want to discuss before we go to public comment or comment from attendees? It's not public comment technically. Matt?
Yeah, it's interesting when you look through the coastal resiliency report. Toe protection is one thing, but one of the things that is talked about fairly often is building dunes. And they say in Nantucket we may need dunes, and sometimes those dunes have, sort of, some of them, I think they're planning to put tubes under them. So it's sort of, how is that? In some ways, that's not. It's kind of interesting. So how do you, and all of this has to be permitted and has to be allowed and all that. But so I look at sort of this area, and part of what we have in here talks about back to Melissa real quick. 3D on the top part had talked about the criteria, but we could put it down in number 1 too. But back to sort of Sconset itself, at some point there's some of Codfish Park is going to have to be relocated or moved. But then the question on Sconset itself, when I think about it, is when do we hold the line or not? And is that going to be at the bluff of, is that going to be a bluff of Sconset, or are we going to allow, sort of Sconset to a road. And I would argue if there's a way to protect the toe of Sconset and keep Sconset town for, from having to move all the sort of fishermen's cottages up on the bluff, if we can protect that part of Sconset, I would think that would be something that would be very popular. And the difference in Sconset than say Brant Point is those are at high ground. Those buildings are not going to be, that area is not going to be dealing with groundwater rise. One of the big problems in Brant Point, even if we found a way to stop the water from getting into Brant Point, which is near impossible, and you probably couldn't do it for any amount of money, even if you could, let's pretend, the water's still going to rise. It's still going to come, the groundwater is still going to come up. So that, so that's a different area, but we're talking about areas, there are going to be areas of the island like, here and, sort of Tom Nevers, et cetera, where that isn't going to be the issue. It's going to be erosion. So, so how we deal with it in different areas is going to be different.
Thank you, Matt. Melissa?
Thanks, Jason. Just to add to that point, Matt, I think is a really good one, is that, the important takeaway for me is that this is one neighborhood area that we're looking at, and clearly there is the larger coastal resiliency plan, and there are going to be recommendations and priorities for us to consider in the context of all of this. And I think we started off by talking about, and in addition to that, all of these other capital improvements that are facing our community. And so I think, and we're going to need to have, and perhaps this comes at the time when we're, finalizing the CRP, or I don't know, but, creating some criteria of and adopting how we do prioritize those projects and what our goals are for coastal resiliency planning island-wide. And so that we're giving ourselves and future boards a template to use for evaluation criteria. When do you move to action? How do you start to capital fund plan for these things? And there's a lot of considerations, and I think it's important that the community understand that we are not laser focused on only this area, that we are. This is somewhat controversial and has created a lot of conversation, but is also an area of need of attention right now. And I have the commitment, I think all the board does, that all of the island is going to receive the same kind of attention and commitment to planning that we're giving to this neighborhood right now.
Thank you, Melissa. Over the years, I've tried to put this in context, because you can get so, not in the weeds, but just have your blinders on and only focus on this part of the island. And I try to think about, well, what am I willing to do for the sewer beds or the airport or the historic downtown or Nantucket? What is my willingness to have some negative impact to the environment to protect the historic downtown or sewer beds? What's the community benefit of all these different areas and projects? What's taxpayers? So you made me think of it when you said about the criteria of all of these different areas. We might do things for downtown to protect it in the next 50 years that maybe we're not willing to do right now in Sconset, but maybe we would in 20 years because we've thought about it more and the values change. And I'm not saying protect this Baxter Road at all costs, regardless of what negative things can happen to the environment. I'm not saying that at all, but there's a balance there. And I think we as a community will be willing to do it in different places. So it's been interesting to see how people value this area of the island, the lighthouse, Sconset, private homes that aren't year round. Does that play into it? So I'm trying to put all that into perspective when looking at this project as a whole. Any other comments? Melissa?
I would just suggest that, we take in comment tonight from the public and some feedback and encourage people to reach out to us and not move toward adoption of this for a period of time so that we can give the community ample time to digest this, discuss it with us, both publicly or one-on-one, and then, let it marinate a little bit would be my suggestion.
Okay. Any other thoughts from board members? I'm fine adopting it and changing it, or I'm fine letting it, like Melissa said, marinating and discussing it, bringing it back. Dawn?
I think it would be better to adopt it when we're totally feel like it's a complete document.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that makes sense. Any other thoughts before we go to some comments? Okay, can we go to the first hand? Oh, Matt.
I think it's all right for it to marinate, but we don't have, weeks and months. There are issues that we're gonna, have to deal with. It would be great to have us united before we meet with Conservation Commission, which, we've been attempting to set up. And so I think that's, so there's some marinating that can go on, but I would say let's work to keep that, let's do this as efficiently and quickly as possibly, because we've got a lot of other steps to make.
Yeah, I agree, Matt. We do need to be quick about it. And this didn't go out last Friday. It went out Monday or Tuesday. So a lot of people haven't had a chance to look at it and marinate it for themselves. Okay, we'll go to attendees. Emily Molden has her hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Emily Molden here for the Nantucket Land Council. I just wanted to thank the Select Board for putting this document together and making it available for review and comment. And also just wanted to speak to appreciation of some of Melissa's comments around trying to get some feedback from additional community members as well. I had some comments that I wanted to make and provide, and I think largely it's just looking for some additional details, maybe just identifying, again, as I think one of you mentioned, some of sort of the hot spots or the areas that are going to be a little bit more challenging to finalize and suss out. But as far as the primary town goal, it's clear about wanting to preserve the homes and access to Baxter Road as long as it's not harming others. But I think it's important to try to clarify what this means to the select board in the town and how it will ultimately be determined. One of the things that I know we've been advocating to the Conservation Commission for a number of years now is to require that the raw monitoring data that's being collected up and down the eastern shoreline be made more available to the town and to the public in an accessible format, just for easier digestion and looking at and having to be able to review. But I think just that's one of those areas where there are likely to be some questions as far as what that means and how it's going to be determined in the future. Under the town strategy moving forward, as you were discussing, it identifies the establishment of triggers for the roadway relocation. And this kind of speaks, I think, a little bit to Jason, to your comments around the cost benefit of different alternatives on different parts of the island, but how those triggers will be determined moving forward. Certainly, they should consider the financial costs of the different alternatives of relocating the road versus maintaining tow protection from more of a life cycle perspective. And I know the letter that the Land Council had submitted to the Select Board a couple of weeks ago from our consultant Applied Coastal included a chart using the cost estimates that were in the Arcadis report, showing that by 2030, it's more expensive to maintain the tow protection than it would be to move the road. So again, kind of looking down at the bottom of the list there under the strategy to spend the town citizen time and resources wisely, just taking that into consideration and making sure that that analysis is really being done and used to establish those triggers. The first phase expansion to the south that's discussed on the list includes having clear failure criteria, and I just really felt it necessary to highlight and again ask the select board to consider and really be thinking about what those failure criteria would look like, and the fact that the existing GO2 permit does have failure criteria that were quite specific, and our recent experience has shown that even when those failure criteria are met, enforcement or whatever the ramifications of that will be can be pretty challenging. So I think some additional consideration and explanation there will be important. And then, as I think was brought up somewhat at your meeting a couple of weeks ago, the final Arcadis report recommendations and their presentation to the select board included that recommended action plan. And while the plan does specifically recommend to begin construction of the new road once the planning is complete and funding is in place, it doesn't really discuss anywhere the expansion of the geotubes. So I think, again, it will be important for the community to understand and for the town to ultimately better explain and justify why it has decided to go against those specific recommendations of the consultant and to jointly file an NOI for expansion. And I just, again, really appreciate the select board providing the opportunity to discuss this and where your stance is and what your goals and strategies are going forward. And hopefully there will be some more feedback for you guys from the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Thanks. Any comments from the board at all on that? I'll just check in each time before we go to the next person. Okay, go to Mary Lawmaker.
Thank you. I have 2 points to make. The first one is rather small but important. And that is that the document references, not doing anyone any harm, but there's no definition of what harm is. And you'll find that people will take it upon themselves to define how that they've been harmed, whether it's financial, whether it's physical loss of property, whether it's lifestyle. There are many, many ways you could define that. So I think you're going to have to be very specific about what constitutes harm and at what magnitude. Is a couple square feet harm, or is it 100 square feet of property loss that would be harm? So that's one point. The second thing that I want to say is that I am just incredulous that this, I do understand what you're trying to accomplish and you're trying to move forward, but I am incredulous that you would issue a statement for a specific project before receiving the coastal resilience plan, which is supposed to guide you for the entire community, and which we have spent more than 2 years developing, and which is supposed to be delivered next week. Especially when Christy references this as a strategic document, the coastal resilience plan is your strategic document. It should be guiding how you deal with individual projects. The town's master plan and the area plans would have a similar relationship. This is an area that should be under the umbrella of a plan for the entire island. And what's going to happen if you make a statement for the Sconset Bluff when Brant Point comes to you and says, well, we want a statement for our area, and Nantucket comes to you and says, we want a statement for our area, and Tom Nevers comes to you, and Wauwinet comes to you, and every individual project says, well, what about us? How do we get our individual needs met? What you're doing is you're invalidating the entire concept of a coastal resilience plan by issuing a statement about an individual area before that plan is even considered. The last thing that I want to say about that, I hope, is, if I can remember, I apologize. I'm sorry, I've lost my train of thought there. Jason, if you would perhaps come back to me, I will put my hand up if I get that back, and I apologize.
Yeah, I wasn't planning on going back to anyone, but maybe Mary, if you had one more point. Matt?
No, I think Mary makes a couple good points. She makes a good point about, everyone else coming to us. That's a valid point. I will say, I think that this does fit in within the coastal resiliency plan, but the coastal resiliency plan wasn't going to be in enough depth for this area, which is why we, sort of augmented it. So other areas are going to need that extra focus at some point as well. And there is a prioritization there, but this is something that exists and is an ongoing, as is ongoing concern in a lot of different realms, cost, legal, et cetera. So I think that's partly why we are where we are.
Thank you, Matt. Dawn?
I would agree with what Matt says. I mean, this is an existing issue that's happening, and we're kind of up against right now that there's active litigation and there's no sand mitigation being provided right now. So these things have got to get worked out. And that it necessitates us moving in some direction.
Yeah, I agree. There was no intention of undermining or invalidating the coastal resiliency plan at all. Matt? You're muted.
Yeah, just a quick comment to what Emily Molden said. I should have commented then, but there was, they did send a great letter. Land Council sent a great letter on cost benefit analysis. Sort of what was somewhat missing in it is who pays. And, so the cost benefit is, are the taxpayers paying? How much is it going to cost, et cetera? So the benefit analysis was great. And if you assume that it's all going to be paid by the taxpayer, then they are correct. But if you are, part of the goal of this is to place, benefit onto the people, takes a large percentage of the benefit on those who are benefiting. And that will in large part negate, situations where people are coming and saying, I want the town to pay to save these two homes or this one home. We're going to have to do it's, so I think that's the concept really is to, is to spend the time and the money wisely in the areas where it can do the most good. And by using that as part of the filter, I think that helps to achieve that.
Thank you, Matt. I think we go to the next hand up.
This is Burton Balkind. I would like to thank Jason for letting me participate. I wanted to talk about a need for the sand budget, which was talked about in the coastal resiliency report. But before that, I just wanted, some of the board members mentioned that they wanted to get the community more involved. I know it is some of the same voices over and over again, but I think as part of the coastal resiliency process, we had a bunch of charrettes where we had, if not hundreds, tens of people attending, and the coastal resiliency plan did come away with some communities' key priorities. It's on page 12, and maintaining Nantucket's character they wanted, or we wanted, implementing nature-based solutions, and there's a list of other ones, and none of them really talks about putting a wall to protect the private properties in a certain area. But I understand that you guys are trying to find solutions. So I just wanted to let you know that there, in the document on page 12, there is some communities' key priorities. So they did have some input. But I did want to talk about where I think somewhat this, what you're doing with this strategy for Sconset is you're putting, as far as sand goes, the cart before the horse, where we need to have an island-wide understanding of how the processes of erosion and accretion are happening, and to just focus on one part of the island without understanding the dynamics of the whole island, I think is a little premature. I don't think it's a bad idea to come up with some ideas on how to address the problem that you're facing with the Sconset and the Bluff and that. But I think you really, to be able to strategize correctly, you need to have a full understanding of how the system works. So I'd just like to say that. Thank you, Chairman, for the time.
Thank you, Bert. Matt?
Yeah, and Bert, this is Matt, and do I have it? Yeah, I got it. Point 5 on the strategy moving forward is in fund initiate a study for sediment transfer, and that's the goal of that, is to do that island wide. And so that's, and we're not asking, that's to the town to do. We're not asking SBPF to do that. We've got, but that is something the town has to undertake. And one of the good things that came out of the work group that SBPF and Jeff and Libby, myself, Ashley were on was, it came clear. It's clear from the work group that we were on. It's clear from the coastal resiliency drafts, is we're going to need a lot of sand, and we can't be digging it out of the ground and driving it around in trucks. We have to find a way to get it elsewhere, which will be difficult with the state. And we have to find a way to transport it. We have to find places to store it that is close enough that you could slurry transport it to places you need it. And some of the recommendations are to put sand by the airport and put sand out in Nantucket, and the state won't allow some of those things now. I think over time that's going to be changing. It's going to have to, for a lot of the state. And I think that we're so sort of some of the harm that if we could put the burden onto SBPF a lot, or help us with SBPF to source sand and to have that available for town projects as we move forward, we have done a huge benefit for the future. I mean, if we continue to sort of bang heads on this, we'll get 5, 10, 15 years out and have no sand for anything. And we're going to need a lot of it. And so I think, that was a huge recommendation coming out of the work group. And it's a key part of this is where are we going to get sand, and how are we going to source it? How are we going to use it?
Thank you, Matt. We go to the next hand up, Bruce Mandel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was very interested to hear Melissa's comments about hearing from other areas of the island. And this is important to us. Matt's comment regarding the town's goal to provide an equitable framework for other areas of the island is encouraging, and I think needs some more strategy input, even in broader terms. And this draft is very nice and good. It helps to kind of help us stare through the veil of executive session discussions. So my comments, and thank you for allowing me a few minutes to do this, are meant to try to impart a broader context on this important issue. Some of the board members now were not involved at the time that my comments will relate to, but a little relative history is important, and it ties into these issues. Some time ago, the issue of coastal resilience and erosion project priorities was set by the town with a hierarchy of projects showing the top priority as the South Shore and Nantucket, including especially the intersection of Nantucket Road and Ames Street, the Ames Street Bridge, alternate scenarios for access to Smith Point. The Sconset Bluff was on that same list of priorities, but it was at a lower level on the list. Dave Franzuto, at the behest of town officials, proposed a simple plan to protect the critical area at the South Shore. At the time, the paved end of Nantucket Road, running south from the intersection of Ames and Nantucket Road, was more than 200 feet from the intersection, but it was eroding. The idea was to curtail and delay the erosion while plans were developed for the protection of the intersection and to protect the access to Ames Street Bridge. At the time, dredged sand not used for neighboring property owners in Pulpus was to be stockpiled at the landfill site and used sacrificially in conjunction with the approved engineered plan to preserve and maintain the intersection while an alternate access plan was developed. This is very similar to what we're seeing now at the Baxter Road project. And that's the tie-in here. This top priority for the South Shore was put aside by the town. The Baxter Road Partnership Project became the forefront, where it remains. It would be good to see an approved priority list for other coastal erosion areas of the island that we can find and discuss as strategy points at this time. Then, and even now, access to Smith Points was said to be important for resident services, such as EMT, fire vehicles, police access, harbor master access, Jackson Point boat launch, public access to beaches, and the like. These are similar reasons to why maintaining Baxter Road's conditions and the geotubes is on the agenda today. Similar to Baxter Road, Mr. Fonzuto's plan for the South Shore area was the subject of several CONCOM meetings. It was met with complete community support. The CONCOM approved the plan. Implementation of the plan was handed off to the DPW. The engineered plans, however, were not followed to the point of being implemented. And Nantucket Road is now nearly at the intersection. Of course, those in the community most engaged with the plan were disappointed that the sand wasn't used as set forth in the approved plan. The South Shore community and members of our Conservation Association have funded costly efforts to protect the South Shore area. Dune protection measures, including installing drift fencing, planting thousands of dune grass plants, private efforts to protect the end of Nantucket Road in cooperation with others, beach bank protection, things of that nature. Recent recommendations by the engineering firm designing the bridge rehabilitation project for Ames Street and Massasoit Bridge, Tech Engineering, called for protective measures addressing daily tide flooding. That's expected to occur by 2030 to be included in the current design project. Slight roadbed elevation for the bridges, protection of the temporary culverts in Nantucket Road, protection of the landfill area for flooding. These were important recommendations. Town officials instead directed these designers to ignore the recommendations and do little to no protective work on Massasoit Bridge, Nantucket Road, and especially on the Ames Street Bridge, because in the words of the town official, the intersection of Nantucket Road and Ames Street was not a priority if it should erode. The Ames Street Bridge would not be enhanced since it was to become, quote, a bridge to nowhere, end of quote. And the residents of Smith Point on the other side of the bridge were, quote, just seasonal residents, end quote, without the same status as residents elsewhere.
Bruce, I'm trying to get everybody 5 minutes. You're over. I know this is important for the whole.
I would like to finish, please.
Sure.
Thank you. So we were told the alternate access in the cases of emergencies could be via South Shore bridges, and I'll speed this up. The point of my comments is that as the Arcadis Coastal Resilience Plan report, a year in the making, a lot of community engagement, make it clear that we need to focus on an island-wide prioritization of coastal resilient projects. The draft reporting provides suggestive prioritization. I sent you guys a graphic that boils it down to 38 resilience projects. And it should be noted that in priority one, 25% of the items relate to the South Shore. We have priorities of higher proposed status than the expansion of the Sconset's Bluff project. Not to say the Sconset's Bluff, unique in its status as a partnership and cost relationship, isn't important. It's clear the Bluff is more stable now without expanding the range of the project. The separate special Arcadis Baxter Road report, and I'm getting close to finishing, thank you, didn't recommend expansion, citing regulatory and stakeholder issues. The several South Shore issues I have raised are all listed as top priorities by these engineers, but they're not being treated as such. Where do the other communities along our island shores fit into our coastal resilience efforts, please? So while the expansion of the already more stable protected area in Sconset is not consistent with our several consultants' draft reports and the prioritizations, I'm speaking to ask that the select board and town administration allow the other listed priorities to be addressed as soonest. Of course, we understand and appreciate the awkward position of the lengthy Sconset situation has backed us into: litigation threats, litigation process cost, finding more sand, equitable cost arrangements. These experiences should be the basis of a learning platform for all of us to create a meaningful, science-based, actionable, island-wide plan.
Bruce, you're getting over 10 minutes. I have to stop you soon. Can you wrap it up, please? I'm sorry.
Last paragraph. The comments made today will receive more than a cursory thank you for comments, we hope. We're concerned about a timely implementation of a careful, transparent coastal resilience plan. I'm sure that we can address island-wide coastal resilience and erosion in our actions at this time. You guys have the data, information, and science. We shouldn't be picking one area over the others. Thank you very much. Do you guys have any questions for me?
No, Bruce, that's not for everybody else. We have to go to other people. So Dawn, you had your hand up for a while.
I just wanted to highlight that exactly what Mr. Mandela is talking about is why we're trying to come to some clearer path on this issue. It's not about prioritizing it. It's about trying to figure out how to prioritize the entire island with resources. By spending so much time fighting about this and spending endless legal dollars, that's really not moved us forward in any way and allowed us to focus on the other areas of the island and figure out a blueprint to work with neighborhoods where private homeowners are providing funding to work through these projects, so that we can get more stuff done all at once. I think that I agree with what he said, but I feel differently about it. Yes.
Thank you, Don. Can we go back to Mary Longacre? Mary, you said you had one other point.
Thank you very much. It is brief. I appreciated Libby's comment at the beginning saying that this document originated from a desire to, put down on paper what the priorities and thoughts of the board are. And I think it's appropriate that the documents stay at that level for internal use to guide you in your decision-making on this project, and that it not rise to a formal statement to be adopted by the select board, because I think that it's the coastal resilience plan that should be informing any kind of formal adoption of statement regarding a coastal resilience project. And that plan is simply not available to you yet. It should be available in short order. I would really encourage you to, to continue to work on this project as you see fit, but not to set precedent by supplanting the coastal resilience plan with individual strategic statements. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. We go to Helmut.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, just very quickly, and actually, in a way, I certainly don't mean to take much time here. And I guess I'm in a way repeating what Don just said, that one of the points being made is why now? Why Baxter Road now? Why should this have the degree of priority that it has in this discussion, in this meeting? And the answer is that there's an enforcement action that the Concom chose to have the geotubes removed, which a number of engineers have pointed out that is highly likely to cause the breach of Baxter Road in relatively short order. It's obviously not in our hands, it's Mother Nature's hands, but any major storm without those geotubes there and Baxter Road will be breached, or it'll get closer than 25 feet. And the result will cost the town multiple millions, tens of millions of dollars before it's over, in order to move Baxter Road, to provide alternative access, etc. Tens of millions of dollars for the Nantucket taxpayer. The alternative is to maintain the project, extend the project, preserve hundreds of thousands, ultimately millions of dollars of property tax revenues for what it appears would be a substantial period of time. The geotubes have been in for 8 years. They have withstood multiple reasonably significant storms. And they're designed to handle a 100-year storm, which is why they've done as well as they've done. That will save the taxpayers of Nantucket tens of millions of dollars. It's a decision that needs to be made now. Anyway, that's it. One other thing to add is that it includes saving homes built in the 19th century, in the 1880s, and so on. So it's also a character thing with regard to the historic nature of the island, as well as the money.
Thank you, Helmut. Select board have any comments? We've been on this for over an hour, which is a good amount of time for us to have a good policy discussion. I think we've heard some good things about this document, about this draft, which has been helpful. Melissa?
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, I think that I would also like to sit on some of these comments before I recommend any changes to it. But I do think that in terms of this being an internal document that states our strategy and our concerns, I really appreciate that comment from Mary. My only thought to that is that it's very difficult. I find it very difficult, and maybe it's in light of sort of the legal conversations that are surrounding, the legal issues that are surrounding this particular issue, to communicate with the community fully and openly about these, the perspective where we've got in relationship to this specific project. So while I don't think an adoption of this statement is an adoption of policy, it feels important that the community can easily understand where our position is in relationship to SBPF and what it is we're working towards. But I'd like the opportunity to take all the comments tonight. I want to thank everybody for them and integrate some of those into some feedback on this. And my suggestion would be that we have it back on an agenda within a couple of weeks. Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa. Matt?
Yeah, no, I think if we do it within a week or two, that's great. I think Mary Longacre makes a good point about precedent, but but at the same time, I think she makes a good point that I'd like to think about. I also think, though, that we need to be, even if we get a sense of we're in agreement, we need to have that as whether we vote it and publish it or whatever. I think we need to have a sense of where we're going so that we can begin to, make the make the steps to get there, because there's a lot of things that are, including, we've got Concom and we've got to deal with, we've got SBF to deal with. We have, so there's a lot of work to be done by staff and by us and by others that, that we all need to be we need to be rowing the boat in the same direction. And we need to be doing that so that we end up with a good example for other areas. So.
Thank you, Matt. Any other comments? Okay, thank you, everyone.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jason, I do have one. I just want to thank Libby, Ken, and Matt for initiating this draft and starting this conversation. I know they put a lot of hard work into it, so thank you all.
Okay, so we're finished there. Any other committee reports? Nothing? Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor by roll call: Don Holgate,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Chrissy Ferrantella,
Aye.
Melissa Murphy,
Aye.
Jason Bridges, aye. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you all.